This is a tale you might find hard to credit, folks. Truly, I occasionally find myself reflecting in disbelief at how the entire situation unfolded. I'm the proprietor of a considerably sized ranch, prime agricultural land that has been part of my family for many generations. One might assume my primary concerns would revolve around meteorological conditions or perhaps coyotes targeting the young calves. Not so. My most significant vexation, the problem that nearly pushed me to excessive drinking, originated from a pair of officious, golf cart operating individuals aspiring to be law enforcement, associated with the newly established, rather pretentious homeowners association that had emerged like a patch of exceptionally aggressive fungi along our southern boundary. And the resolution? Well, suffice it to say my grandfather, a man whose forgotten knowledge of leverage and practical wisdom surpasses what most individuals ever acquire, resolved it was time to implement what he delightedly called his suburban deterrent system. You could describe them as unconventional ground charges. This narrative, this particular account, is truly remarkable. Events became absurd. They descended into pettiness. And in the end, the outcome was profoundly gratifying. My ranch, the Barm, is no small-scale recreational farm. We are discussing more than 1,000 acres of undulating hills, grazing land, a section of woodland, and a stream that meanders directly through its most picturesque area. My great-grandfather laid claim to this territory, and my grandfather, the previously mentioned designer of our distinctive defense mechanism, was raised on it just as my father was and just as I was. It represents more than mere property. It is a heritage. And throughout all those years, we lived in harmony with our adjoining landowners, predominantly other agricultural operations and a quiet, unincorporated hamlet situated a few miles further on. Then Whispering Pines Estates arrived. That was the designation given to the expansive development of uniform, beige residences that consumed the former Henderson Place, directly abutting our southernmost fence. Abruptly, we found ourselves with hundreds of new inhabitants and, along with them, an HOA board that appeared to believe its authority reached all the way to our very doorstep. The initial indication of impending problems was faint, almost easily overlooked. A golf cart, one of those more elaborate models featuring a small Whispering Pine security emblem on its side, was positioned a mere couple of feet within our land, beneath the canopy of an ancient oak tree that was, by rights, ours. The fencing in that location was minimal, consisting of just 3 lines of barbed wire, intended more to delineate a border than to physically impede anything resolute. I surmised, all right, new arrivals, perhaps they were mistaken about the property line. On that first occasion, I simply gestured a greeting. The 2 individuals inside, clad in identical polo shirts that were a size too snug and wearing reflective sunglasses as if they were trying out for a role in a cheaply made police drama, merely gazed back. The following week, the same thing occurred. Identical location, identical golf cart, identical pair of would-be action heroes. This time, I strolled over. "Afternoon, gentlemen," I offered, endeavoring to maintain a cordial tone. "Just wanted to inform you that this area is actually part of the Barm. The HOA property concludes back at that survey post." I indicated the concrete marker almost concealed in the tall vegetation. The driver, a heavy-set man with a perpetual sneer, whom I had privately labeled Ranger Rick, scarcely looked at it. "We're cognizant," he mumbled, not even troubling himself to remove his sunglasses. "We're simply monitoring the situation. Community protection, you understand. Community protection. My community, or the one they represented." "Well, I value the watchfulness," I replied, still striving for a diplomatic approach. "But this specific location is private land. We move cattle through this area on occasion, and I wouldn't want your cart to obstruct them or, frighten them." Ranger Rick's associate, a more youthful, gaunt fellow I had named Deputy Dog, chimed in, "We are permitted to be here. It's for surveillance." "Permitted by whom?" I felt like asking, but I restrained myself. "Look," I stated, my voice a bit more resolute, "I am requesting courteously. Kindly remain on your side of the boundary. There's ample shade over there as well." Ranger Rick actually gave a short, derisive laugh. "We will position ourselves where we judge appropriate for the safety of Whispering Pines." And with that remark, he engaged the cart's gear and leisurely rolled back onto HOA territory. Not with any semblance of an apology, but rather as if he were indulging a somewhat dim-witted child. I remained there, observing their departure, a feeling of incredulity constricting in my gut. Deemed appropriate on my property. Oh, this was unlikely to end well. I could sense it instinctively, much like I can sense an approaching storm. The atmosphere had shifted. That exchange was merely the initial volley, the first inkling of the sense of prerogative that was evidently a standard component of Whispering Pines estates. I returned to the farmhouse and recounted the incident to Grandpa. He was seated on the porch swing, honing a knife with unhurried, methodical movements. He listened without uttering a sound, his light blue gaze fixed on the faraway hills. When I concluded, he simply ejected a jet of tobacco juice into the petunias, a habit Mom always detested, and remarked, "Sounds like they require some education." That was Grandpa's manner of indicating that matters were about to become intriguing. He offered no further details, merely resuming his knife sharpening. Yet there was a particular firmness to his jawline that I knew well. It was the identical expression he wore when a piece of equipment was malfunctioning, right before he would strip it down to its fundamental parts and compel it to cooperate. The HOA, I surmised, was on the verge of becoming his new obstinate tractor. Over the ensuing few weeks, the parking incidents not only persisted but intensified. It was as if my polite entreaty had been interpreted as a dare. Now it wasn't solely the golf cart. At times it was a white SUV, also adorned with the Whispering Pines security logo, parked even deeper onto our property. Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog appeared to make it their personal crusade to occupy that area beneath our oak tree. They would remain there for extended periods, sometimes using binoculars to survey our pastures. It felt intrusive, as though we were displays in their personal menagerie. I once observed them scribbling notes on a clipboard. What could they possibly be documenting? My champion bull Ferdinand napping? The grass developing? It was exasperating. I attempted a more straightforward tactic. I put up new, exceedingly clear, private property, no trespassing signs directly on the fence posts facing their chosen parking area. Bright yellow with black lettering, impossible to overlook. The subsequent day, one of the signs was pulled down, lying twisted in the soil. The other bore what seemed suspiciously like a muddy shoe print. That was the moment my patience, already stretched to its limit, officially gave way. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, calculated gesture of disrespect. This was them, quite literally, asserting a claim on my land through sheer effrontery. I photographed the spoiled signs and their vehicle clearly on my land, recording dates and times. I was beginning to compile a dossier, although I was not yet certain how I would utilize it. My subsequent action was to attempt to communicate with the HOA leadership directly. I searched for their contact details online, not a simple endeavor, as they appeared to protect it like classified information, and eventually located an email address for the HOA president, a Mr. Arthur Prendergast. I composed a courteous yet firm message detailing the circumstances, stating unequivocally that his security staff were repeatedly intruding and asking that he direct them to stop without delay. I even included photographs. A week passed. Silence. Then another. At last, I got a response. It was not an apology. It was not a commitment to rectify the problem. It was an exemplar of bureaucratic evasion and condescension. Mr. Prendergast, in language so ornate it almost colored the display, informed me that the Whispering Pines Community Safety Patrol functioned under protocols formulated to guarantee the serenity and well-being of all inhabitants. He insinuated that their stationing near our property line served as a visual impediment to unspecified rural elements that might present a danger to his immaculate development. Rural elements? Was he referring to my cattle? Or perhaps Grandpa when he was inspecting fences in his 60-year-old pickup? The letter continued by proposing that if I harbored anxieties, I should perhaps think about more clearly defining my property, as if the current fence and survey posts were inadequate. There was no admission of the trespassing, no apology for the ruined signs, merely a subtle suggestion that I was the source of the issue. I perused the email twice, then a third time, each reading causing my anger to intensify slightly. This Prendergast individual, whomever he might be, evidently existed in an alternate reality, one where his HOA regulations somehow overrode actual property statutes. I presented the email to Grandpa. He read it deliberately, his lips moving almost imperceptibly. Upon finishing, he returned my phone, a faint, grim smile on his face. Better delineating, eh? He pondered. Well, son, I suppose we can assist him with that. Some individuals only comprehend a distinct boundary when they stumble over it. He gave a wink, and I realized then that the education phase was about to get underway. Diplomatic efforts had proven futile. Courteous requests had been met with disdain. The time had come for an alternative strategy. The suppressed anger that had been simmering inside me started to consolidate into a frigid, unyielding determination. They desired to engage in games. Very well. But they were soon to discover that this seasoned rancher and his even more seasoned grandfather were familiar with a few games of their own, games played with soil and perspiration and a profound comprehension of the land they were so thoughtlessly disrespecting. The challenge had been issued not by me but by President Prendergast and his inept enforcers, and we, the rural elements, were poised to accept it. The question remained, what precisely did Grandpa have in mind? He was being maddeningly nonspecific, merely humming to himself and dedicating a significant amount of time near the southern fence line with a measuring tape and a notepad, occasionally prodding the earth like a geologist prospecting for gold. The tipping point, the event that truly solidified our determination to implement decisive measures, occurred on a sweltering July afternoon. I was in the southern pasture with my most capable ranch hand, Miguel, attempting to guide a recently born calf and its nervous mother back toward the main group of cattle. It was hot, grimy work, demanding patience and a gentle approach. Just as we were achieving some success, the Whispering Pines SUV appeared, jarring over the rough terrain, stirring up a plume of dust, and parking directly in their customary spot, a mere 50 feet from our working area. Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog alighted, radiating officious self-importance, and actually rested against our fence, arms folded, observing us as if we were the day's diversion. The commotion and abrupt arrival of the vehicle startled the mother cow. She bolted, the calf scrambling in her wake, nullifying a good 30 minutes of meticulous maneuvering. I saw crimson. I strode angrily towards the fence, Miguel following warily behind me. "What in the blazes do you think you're doing?" I shouted, abandoning all semblance of civility. Ranger Rick, to his credit, didn't so much as recoil. "Just observing, sir," he stated with that maddeningly composed tone he invariably employed. "Standard patrol." "Standard patrol?" I retorted. "You just cost me half an hour of effort and frightened my animals. You are on private land and you are obstructing my work. I demand you leave my property immediately." Deputy Dog, appearing somewhat less self-assured now that I was visibly incensed, mumbled something about verifying no suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? I nearly gagged. "The only suspicious activity around here is the two of you trespassing where you have no right to be. This is an operational ranch, not your private scenic viewpoint." Ranger Rick actually had the audacity to adjust his reflective sunglasses and state, "Mr. Prendergast has assured us our presence here is advantageous for community relations." I simply stared at him, speechless. Advantageous? He was either suffering from delusions or was an inveterate liar. "Community relations?" I said, my voice dangerously subdued. "Allow me to enlighten you about community relations. You and your superior are approximately one more foolish act away from discovering what a formal trespassing citation and a call to the sheriff entail. Now, for the final time, depart from my property." Perhaps it was the reference to the sheriff, or perhaps even his dense cranium finally acknowledged the intensity of my fury, but Ranger Rick at last gestured to Deputy Dog and they re-entered their SUV. They did not depart straight away, however. They remained there for a good 5 minutes, engine running, merely to assert a point, I imagine. Then, with a final, contemptuous acceleration of the engine, they reversed and drove off. I watched them depart, trembling with a combination of anger and exasperation. Miguel simply shook his head. "Patron," he said softly, "these men, they possess no respect." He was correct. And it was evident that respect was not something they would offer willingly. It was something we would be compelled to demand, or more precisely, engineer. That evening, I described the incident to Grandpa. He listened, his face inscrutable, while methodically oiling his old shotgun, a chore he typically saved for moments of profound thought or imminent undertakings. When I concluded, he placed the firearm aside and regarded me. "Very well," he stated. "It's time to cease trifling with these urbanites. They desire boundaries. We shall provide them with boundaries they won't quickly forget." A sparkle in his eye was part mischief, part resolve. "They favor that spot beneath the oak tree, do they?" he mused, more to himself than to me. "Reckon we can render it somewhat less welcoming." The subsequent morning, Grandpa arose before sunrise. I discovered him in the barn, sifting through a collection of disused irrigation apparatus, pipes, sprinklers, timers, items we hadn't employed in ages, not since we had modernized the main pasture systems. He possessed the concentrated, almost fanatical expression he adopted when deeply engrossed in a task. "What are you planning, Grandpa?" I inquired, leaning on a stall. He smiled, a broad, genuine smile that crinkled the skin around his eyes. "Just a bit of gardening, son. A touch of hydroengineering. Consider it targeted soil moisture enhancement." He selected a particularly sizable, corroded sprinkler head, the type engineered to propel water a considerable distance. Think our associates in the golf cart will welcome a touch of morning dew? The initial phase in Grandpa's comprehensive plan involved reconnaissance and strategizing, a stage he approached with the thoroughness of an experienced military leader readying for conflict. He had me persist with my record-keeping. Each instance, Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog positioned their vehicle on our land. I recorded it. Date, time, vehicle type, length of their presence. I captured photographs from inconspicuous vantage points, complete with timestamps and geographical coordinates. Grandpa insisted on this, son, he had remarked, tapping his forehead. Strong fences create amicable neighbors. But a solid paper trail establishes an undeniable case if these individuals decide to bring attorneys into the matter. While I assumed the role of intelligence gatherer, Grandpa transformed into the surveyor and engineer. He dedicated hours near the southern fence, not merely in the vicinity of the troublesome oak tree, but along a substantial 100-yard segment. He utilized his old transit level, peering through it, hammering stakes into the earth, and murmuring calculations to himself. He even retrieved the original survey plats from the county records, contrasting them with his own findings to ensure we knew our property boundary with pinpoint accuracy. He found that the fence, in a few spots, was actually positioned a foot or two inside our genuine property line, a remnant of older, less accurate fencing practices. Good to ascertain, he had grumbled, making a mental note. Always beneficial to possess a bit of leeway. We had a succinct meeting with Ben Tracy, our family's legal counsel in the county town. Ben is an astute individual, recognized for his direct, no-fuss manner. I presented the circumstances, the continual trespassing, the disregarded admonitions, Prendergast's disdainful communication, the disruption to our ranch activities. Ben listened with forbearance, examined my expanding collection of evidence, and then reclined in his chair. Well, he stated, a faint smile playing on his lips. President Prendergast and his HOA are what we in the legal field technically describe as being incorrect. Entirely, unequivocally incorrect. You are perfectly entitled to initiate legal proceedings for trespassing, request an injunction, the complete array of measures. He affirmed that the HOA possessed absolutely no authority or power on our private land. Their assertions of community safety patrols were inconsequential if those patrols traversed the property line without authorization. However, Ben went on, legal disputes can be protracted and costly. Occasionally, a more pragmatic resolution emerges. He cast a glance at Grandpa, who merely offered a non-committal shrug, though I detected the spark of amusement in his eyes. You have every prerogative to manage your land as you deem appropriate, Ben finished, provided that what you undertake is on your property and does not constitute a public disturbance or breach any particular county regulations. You are perfectly fine. If they cause damage to their vehicle on your land due to conditions you've established on your land, after being repeatedly cautioned not to be there, that responsibility lies with them. That was all the assurance Grandpa required. His targeted soil moisture enhancement initiative began to materialize, or rather, to become miry. He was no longer solely considering sprinklers. He was contemplating the terrain itself. He had observed that Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog invariably parked their SUV or golf cart in the precise same arrangement, wheels positioned just so, to obtain the maximum shade from the oak. Creatures of routine, Grandpa had remarked with a chuckle. Foreseeable. That is their vulnerability. His strategy, as it gradually came into view, was fiendishly straightforward yet sophisticated in its agricultural shrewdness. He opted to concentrate on an area approximately 20 by 20 feet directly beneath the most desirable shaded portion of the oak. Initially, employing the small tractor equipped with the tilling implement, he loosened the soil in that particular area. Not deeply, just sufficiently to break up the topsoil, creating an appearance that we were readying it for some type of planting. Good aeration, he had proclaimed to an unseen assembly, encourages robust root development. Following this came the irrigation elements. He excavated the assortment of antiquated, robust agricultural sprinkler heads, large brass contraptions that seemed capable of generating a minor deluge. He carefully cleaned them, replaced a few seals, and then, under the concealment of twilight, we laid a discreet, shallowly interred water pipe from a nearby stock tank pump to the prepared patch. He placed 3 sprinkler heads strategically, largely concealed by tufts of tall grass we had neglected to cut, all directed squarely at the intended area. These were not your standard garden pop-up sprinklers. These were engineered to dispense a substantial quantity of water with significant pressure. The crowning feature was the timer. Grandpa located an old mechanical timer in the barn, the type with substantial dials, and connected it to the pump. He programmed it to activate at unpredictable yet regular times when Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog were most prone to be availing themselves of our unauthorized shade, typically late morning and mid-afternoon. "Just ensuring our new planting area remains adequately damp," he commented, his expression a flawless portrayal of innocence. But there was an additional element. The soil moisture enhancement constituted only the first part. The second part entailed rendering the ground itself less appealing. After tilling, Grandpa had me subtly, almost unnoticeably, shape the land within that 20 by 20 area. He instructed me to form a very shallow, nearly imperceptible dip, a slight hollow that would not be apparent to the casual observer but would gather any water dispensed by the sprinklers. "Water requires a destination," he elucidated. "Or, in this situation, a place to linger." He then inadvertently embedded a few strategically positioned rocks, about the size of a fist, and some gnarled old tree roots just under the surface of the tilled earth, situated perfectly where tires would likely come to rest or attempt to find purchase. We concealed them with a thin layer of dirt, rendering them practically invisible. The concluding touch was a liberal application of rich, dark compost blended with clay we had excavated from the creek bank. "Assists in retaining moisture," Grandpa stated, distributing it with a spade. It also, I observed, possessed the characteristic of becoming incredibly slippery and tenacious when wet. The entire undertaking spanned approximately 2 days of sporadic effort, time to elude detection from the Whispering Pines side. To any casual onlooker, it would merely seem as though we were tending to a small section of our property, perhaps readying it for new vegetation or an erosion control measure. No one would surmise the meticulously calibrated, watery reception that awaited the subsequent uninvited callers. As we concluded, Grandpa stepped back, placing his hands on his hips, appraising his efforts. A gentle wind rustled the foliage of the oak tree. The snare was prepared. It was understated, located entirely on our land, and, as Ben Tracy had affirmed, completely lawful. "Now," Grandpa declared, a look of contentment in his eyes, "we bide our time, and perhaps," he appended with a wink, "we wish for a bit of precipitation to, so to speak, get things started." I had to concede it was an ingenious scheme, depending on natural processes and their own foreseeable behavior. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it promised to be exceptionally troublesome and, if fortune favored us, mortifying for our unwelcome guests. The eagerness was almost overwhelming. We did not have an extended wait for the priming. A decent summer downpour passed through that evening. Not a torrential rain, but sufficient to compact the loosened soil and provide Grandpa's targeted soil moisture enhancement zone with a beneficial preliminary soaking. The following morning, the sun emerged, brilliant and intense. It was an ideal day for finding shade. Around 10:30 a.m., precisely as anticipated, the white Whispering Pines SUV materialized, making its way ponderously along the uneven track toward our fence. My pulse began to quicken slightly. Grandpa, who had been examining a nearby fence post with field glasses, gave me an inconspicuous thumbs up. Ranger Rick was at the wheel with Deputy Dog in the passenger seat. They drove directly to their preferred location, guiding the SUV into the shadow of the large oak, their tires coming to rest on the exact area of ground Grandpa had so carefully prepared. For an instant, silence prevailed. They switched off the engine, and I could envision them exhaling with relief as they found refuge from the sun. I held my breath. Grandpa had programmed the initial sprinkler activation for 10:35 a.m. The digital display on my phone advanced 10:34, 10:35, and then the action commenced. With an abrupt whumph and a sequence of metallic clack-clack-clacks, The 3 antiquated sprinkler heads sprang to life. They were not dispensing a gentle spray. Oh no, they were ejecting potent, arching streams of murky stock tank water with the concentrated force of small fire hoses. All 3 torrents converged precisely on the Whispering Pines SUV. The outcome was immediate and spectacular. Water struck the windshield and roof with a noise resembling intense hail. Muddy spray coated the sides, instantly converting the immaculate white vehicle into a Jackson Pollock-esque creation of brown streaks. I could faintly discern 2 extremely surprised individuals inside, gesticulating frantically. Ranger Rick grappled with the ignition, attempting to restart the SUV. The engine turned over and he forcefully shifted into reverse. The rear wheels spun, throwing up plumes of now thoroughly wet, clay-laden mud. Instead of reversing out, the SUV merely skidded slightly to the side, its tires sinking further into the bog Grandpa had orchestrated. The front wheels, when he attempted to move forward, behaved similarly. They were ensnared, wonderfully, totally ensnared, and the sprinklers persistently continued their assault. Clack, 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 drenching them without pause. After approximately 2 minutes, which must have seemed an age to them, the timer disengaged, and the sprinklers ceased, leaving a tableau of absolute muddy disarray. The SUV was thoroughly coated. The ground surrounding it was a sodden quagmire, and I could only surmise the condition of the interior had they left a window even marginally ajar. Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog gingerly opened their doors, stepping out into the morass. Their gleaming black footwear vanished instantly into several inches of slick grime. Their countenances displayed a perfect fusion of indignation and astonishment. Ranger Rick, his face crimson, began shouting something, but his utterances were inaudible from that distance. He was evidently far from pleased. He trudged around the vehicle, slipping and sliding, his attire acquiring a new, soil-like veneer. Deputy Dog merely stood there, appearing dejected, like a sodden creature. This was exceeding even my most optimistic expectations. Grandpa, who had ambled over to join me on our side of the fence, was exerting considerable effort to maintain a composed expression, but his shoulders were trembling. "Appears they're encountering some unforeseen watering," he remarked, his voice tinged with pure, complete contentment. Roughly 20 minutes later, following considerable slipping, cursing, I presumed, and futile efforts to dislodge the SUV, a different vehicle came into view from the direction of Whispering Pines. It was a large, black, spotlessly maintained Lincoln Navigator, and driving it, I conjectured, was the man himself, President Arthur Prendergast. He parked on his side of the boundary, well clear of the mud, and advanced toward us, his expression like a gathering storm. He was a gentleman in his late 50s, attired in costly-looking golf wear, a neat polo shirt, impeccably creased khaki trousers, and brilliant white golf shoes. He seemed entirely incongruous against the setting of our operational ranch, and even more so now with his security vehicle mired in filth. "What is the explanation for this?" Prendergast yelled, his voice strained with anger as he reached the fence. Your sprinklers have incapacitated my security vehicle. This is a disgrace. This is malicious damage." Grandpa stepped forward, as serene as a summer dawn. "Mr. Prendergast, I take it?" he said, his tone civil yet resolute. "Name's Jedediah Thorne. This young man here is my grandson, the proprietor of this ranch." Prendergast stammered, "I am not concerned with who you are. Your device has inflicted substantial damage. You intentionally aimed at my patrol." "Now, wait just a moment," I interjected, moving to stand beside Grandpa. "Firstly, Mr. Prendergast, your vehicle is situated on our private land. We have courteously and repeatedly requested your personnel not to park here. We have dispatched formal communications to you. You opted to disregard those entreaties. We were guaranteeing community protection." Prendergast fumed. "By intruding?" Grandpa inquired, arching an eyebrow. "An odd method of proceeding. Regarding those sprinklers, we are merely watering a new section of ground cover we are attempting to cultivate for erosion management. You observe this particular area becomes somewhat bare beneath this ancient oak. We cannot be held responsible if your men chose to park directly in the midst of our agricultural enhancement activities. Prendergast's face was becoming increasingly flushed. This is a calculated act of hostility. I am contacting the sheriff. Please do, I stated calmly. We possess a file approximately an inch thick documenting your crew's trespassing over the recent months, inclusive of photographs showing them vandalizing our signage. We also retain a copy of your rather contemptuous letter. I am confident the sheriff will find hearing all perspectives quite informative. True to his word, Prendergast produced his phone and initiated a call. While we awaited, Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog succeeded in freeing themselves from the mire. Looking utterly beaten and soiled, they trudged toward Prendergast, grumbling about ambuscades and concealed traps. When the county sheriff's deputy, a young woman named Miller, whom I knew in passing, eventually showed up, Prendergast commenced an irate diatribe regarding our malevolent sprinklers and the harm to his prized HOA vehicle. Deputy Miller listened with forbearance, then addressed us. I presented our version: the persistent trespassing, the disregarded cautions, our entitlement to manage our own property. I indicated the property markers, clearly showing the HOA vehicle was significantly within our territory. I volunteered to present my documentation. Grandpa added, just endeavoring to cultivate a bit of grass, officer. Didn't anticipate individuals parking their truck in our new planting area, particularly when it's distinctly identified as private land. Deputy Miller approached the bogged-down SUV, observed the sprinklers, then looked back at the property line. She heaved a sigh. Mr. Prendergast, she said, turning back to him, as far as I can determine, your vehicle is on private property without the proprietor's consent. This is farmland. Any agricultural endeavors they conduct here are their own affair. If your vehicle became immobilized due to conditions on their land while trespassing, I regret to say that is a private legal issue between you and them, or more precisely, your concern. Prendergast appeared on the verge of a stroke. But they did it intentionally. Can you establish that they deliberately targeted your vehicle where it would be present, as opposed to them merely irrigating their field? Deputy Miller inquired, her face impassive. This spot, she indicated the muddy area, is evidently being cultivated, and they did caution you to remain off. She then addressed Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog. And gentlemen, I would suggest you respect private property demarcations in the future. Persistent trespassing could lead to official warnings. With that, she bid us all a pleasant day, proposed Mr. Prendergast contact a towing service, and departed, leaving behind a seething HOA president, 2 mud-covered security personnel, and a splendidly stuck SUV. Grandpa merely rested against a fence post, plucked a blade of grass, and began to chew on it, a subtle smile gracing his lips. Reckon that planting area, he murmured to me, is going to require consistent watering. The initial confrontation had been unequivocally won. The direct consequence of the great sprinkler assault was, to put it mildly, strained. President Prendergast did, in fact, summon a tow truck, a colossal vehicle that encountered significant trouble maneuvering the rough terrain on his side of the fence merely to extend a line to the afflicted SUV. It consumed the better part of 2 hours, involved considerable winching, and a great deal of vociferous, exasperated yelling from Prendergast to finally retrieve the mud-encrusted vehicle. We observed the entire event from our veranda, enjoying iced tea. Grandpa even retrieved his binoculars for an enhanced perspective of what he termed the recovery mission. He provided sporadic remarks, primarily technical assessments of the tow truck operator's methods. The subsequent week, we were recipients of an exceptionally sternly phrased communication from legal counsel acting for Whispering Pines Estates. It charged us with maliciously establishing a dangerous situation and intentional vandalism, alluding to the mud, it seemed, and insisted we compensate for the cleaning and potential mechanical impairment to their security SUV, a figure amounting to several $1,000s. They further insisted we halt and refrain from our hostile irrigation methods near their property line. I promptly sent the letter to Ben Tracy, our attorney. Ben's reply was immediate and masterful. He composed a response that not only reasserted our prerogative to manage our own land but also initiated a counterclaim for restitution related to the persistent trespassing, the vandalism of our no trespassing signs, and the overall disruption they had caused. He enclosed copies of my detailed records, photographs, and even a slightly sarcastic proposal to furnish Whispering Pines with advice on cultivating drought-tolerant plants, considering their evident struggles with abundant moisture. Ben also noted that any harm to their vehicle was a direct consequence of their choice to disregard clearly displayed warnings and trespass on private agricultural property actively undergoing improvement. He concluded by courteously intimating that if they desired to prevent further unintentional watering, they should simply direct their staff to honor distinctly marked property boundaries. We received no further communication from their lawyer concerning that specific request for payment. The landmines, as Grandpa persisted in calling his irrigation setup, stayed operational. We didn't operate them continuously, only at calculated, erratic times, invariably during daylight, invariably when our seedbed appeared as though it might be becoming parched. For several days, Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog, now in a different, albeit equally white, SUV, would approach the limit of their property, peer across the fence at the moist area beneath our oak tree, and then, after a period of seemingly profound deliberation, slowly retreat and select an alternative parking spot well within their own confines. The communication, it appeared, was at last being understood. News of the muddy SUV affair, as it evidently became known within Whispering Pines, circulated rapidly through their neighborhood. We began to overhear fragments from residents there who also frequented the same agricultural supply store as us. Apparently, Prendergast's overbearing demeanor was not universally admired, and the narrative of his security personnel receiving a comprehensive soaking and a mud treatment on adjacent, uncivilized lands, as one inhabitant derisively termed it, occasioned considerable mirth. Prendergast's standing suffered somewhat. There were dissatisfactions voiced at their subsequent HOA assembly, or so we gathered, concerning the needless friction with the ranch and the rather conspicuous embarrassment. Some inhabitants even commenced to doubt the expense and genuine utility of their highly praised security patrol. Regarding the land itself, Grandpa chose to render the agricultural enhancement project somewhat more enduring and visually appealing while still fulfilling its preventive function. We had a quantity of quality topsoil delivered and properly leveled the area beneath the oak, fashioning a gentle, almost imperceptible depression that would indeed gather water. Then, rather than mere grass, Grandpa instructed me to plant a dense boundary of robust, quick-growing, and notably thorny rose bushes, the traditional, fiercely barbed variety, all along our side of that specific segment of fence. Visually attractive, Grandpa commented, surveying his creation, but a genuine nuisance to attempt to penetrate if uninvited. The roses flourished in the intermittently watered soil, and within a single growing season they established a thick, aromatic, and completely impenetrable obstruction. The no trespassing signs were reinstalled, this time affixed to robust steel poles set in concrete just beyond the rose hedge. We never again encountered an issue with Whispering Pine security parking on our property. They had learned their lesson through difficult experience. The oak tree remained our oak tree, its shade enjoyed solely by our livestock and the occasional visiting deer. The tranquility of the barn was reinstated. Reflecting on it, the escalation of a simple disagreement over a parking space to such dramatic proportions is almost comical. Yet, it was never truly about the parking, was it? It concerned respect. Respect for private property, respect for established limits, respect for one's neighbors even if they are perceived as rural elements. Prendergast and his team lacked any, and they presumed we were merely unsophisticated ranchers who would readily submit. They misjudged us. They particularly misjudged Grandpa, a man who comprehends that sometimes the most effective way to address a provocateur is not with physical force, but with a strategically aimed sprinkler head and a thorough grasp of mud dynamics. He demonstrated that resourcefulness and a measure of traditional perseverance can overcome presumption and a sense of superiority on any given day. The entire episode imparted a significant lesson to me: maintain your position, be aware of your entitlements, keep detailed records, and never, ever miscalculate the astuteness of an elderly man devoted to his land. And at times, a little targeted soil moisture enhancement is all that is required to convey your message with absolute clarity. So that is the account of Grandpa's landmines and the way we regained our small area of tranquility from the neighboring HOA. It serves as a reminder that one doesn't invariably require legal counsel in a judicial setting to prevail in one's disputes. At times, a measure of ingenious design and a robust amount of unwavering determination can achieve the desired outcome quite effectively. Until next time, maintain your fences well and keep your sprinklers prepared.